colleges for people to become technicians and be allowed to work at a place like NASA. It's starting to happen, but it was more of a push factor in the beginning than it was a pull factor from the space economy. Now that's starting to shift, and we're seeing the pull come from a lot of the companies. There's a shortage of engineers. You talk to any CEO at any major space company, and all they'll talk about is we can't find enough engineers. And the price of those engineers is going up, and the universities are cranking them out. There's just a problem. The demand is for experience, and the supply is tilting heavily to inexperienced but highly energetic coming out of school. And this is similar to the early 60s with the Apollo program, when there was a demand for engineers for NASA, for hundreds of thousands of engineers, and they weren't quite there yet. And that's why you had the average age at NASA back then, during the Apollo program, being around 25. And that's why you saw SpaceX in its first 5 years. The average age in that place was around 25, but they started with very experienced people who were able to build that structure and develop those younger people. We're going to see that for a while with our new space economy. We're going to see a lot of mentors bringing up younger key people as we go forward, and that'll be the same at every point in the job cycle. And these blue collar jobs, by the way, most of them are going to be on Earth for the foreseeable future, but it won't be some cool new space company that's going to be moving stuff around on the moon or Mars for mining or development. It'll be Caterpillar. It's not going to be somebody else. It's not going to be a new company that's going to do asteroid mining. It'll be the big ones on Earth who have the resources and the capital to make that investment, like Inco and those others. And if they're given the incentives that they need to develop everything for those markets, they'll move much more quickly. And I think the government can do a lot to help, the way it did with the oil and gas industry at the turn of the last century, with research and development, tax credits and incentives. That's the only way. The government's good at priming the pump for new industries. It's really bad at running businesses, but it's really good at funding initial research and development and using the power of the tax law to incent companies to build. And I think you're going to see a lot of that be required in the coming years. There was an announcement today from York Space, one of the largest manufacturers of spacecraft, satellite buses specifically. And they just completed their new manufacturing facility outside Denver. And it doubles their capacity. They'll be able to produce now 1,000 spacecraft a year at their facilities. Those are real jobs. Those are real jobs with a lot of downstream economy and support and other suppliers that are going to stand up where there was nothing before. And the downstream effect of big players like that can't be underestimated. It's going to take the big ones to lead us. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to see this happening over and over again. And it is happening over and over again. We talk a lot about the fact that, for new companies, the economy is horrible. There isn't any capital. It's dried up. Rates are up a little bit. Venture capital is nowhere to be found right now. This is for companies raising capital right now. This is the first time you're seeing down rounds where they go out to raise more money at a lower valuation than they did the last time. First time since 2017. We've seen that in the venture capital space. So it's hurting a lot of young companies that are out there raising capital. I'm in the midst of doing that right now with Freefall. And when you talk to the venture capital market, they just shake their heads. They don't see the opportunity in space today because it's a much longer investment cycle than they're used to. Venture capitalists like to manage their portfolios with a stopwatch, and you need patient money for space. You need a 10, 12-year investment, more along the lines of what family offices might invest in, for example. And so the creation of jobs is flatlining a little bit for the bottom part of that pyramid of companies in the new space economy. At the top end, where they've already been capitalized, where they hit their home run in 2021, which was the last big year for raising capital when everyone was excited about the new space economy and valuations were very high. Those companies have critical mass. Some have gone public, but not many, but they're capitalized. Companies like Intuitive Machines, Axiom, those who are over the hump and have gotten contracts and are now in a revenue position to start feeding that growth engine. But the vast majority of companies in this economy are still trying to get over that hill. And so because of that, hiring is pushed off. The demand for new people, and we've seen it in a number of places, it has waned quite a bit. Will that continue? I hope not. I think it's going to be a matter of good technology is going to find capital. It's just going to take longer. And so this backlog of business acceleration in kind of a perverse way helps the job market by giving it more time to catch up. But I think at the end of the day, if we don't have universities working with industry to say, industry says, this is what we need, go produce some. This old story we've always had about maybe universities should be graduating students who actually will fill the job market need, as opposed to just generally producing students. There's a much higher traction for jobs for people with useful degrees if they're willing to go into certain industries where there's demand. And I think we can point in that direction when it comes to technology, with the dramatic increase in engineering enrollment that's happening across the country now. It is happening, but not fast enough. So industry has to stand there and pull. Industry has to step up and say, hey, listen, this is what we're paying. If you come out with this kind of a degree, you're going to have a job. And as I tell a lot of young people that I mentor and speak to, especially at the collegiate level, you've got a job for the rest of your life. You're going to enter an economy with space that's going to be around long past you. The demand is built in. And the one thing about the space economy is, people talk about the tech industry. Space will dwarf our tech economy. It will dwarf it. The people who aren't paying attention to the space economy have no clue what's going on inside of this industry. And so when you get down to it, unlike the internet tech boom that we went through and bust and then boom again, we have another buyer, another consumer in the space economy that wasn't there when we had tech, and that's the US government and every government around the world. They don't go through cyclical needs in buying. Space Force has a 24/7 appetite. So does the Department of Defense. They can't get technology fast enough, and they're throwing tons of money at young companies with SBIRs to get technology into their hands. And the Space Force just created a Rapid Capabilities Office last fall, which says, yeah, SBIRs are great. It's probably 5 or 6 year technology. Anybody have anything I can deploy within 24 months? That's what they're after. And I think you're seeing this. Space Command put up a front door online where you can get in there faster. It just speaks to how bad the bureaucracy has always been, because once you go through the front door, there's still 11 more doors back there. But they're trying to accelerate acquisition. And the faster they acquire technology, the faster these young companies become legit. They're made. Suddenly it's, let's go double our size. One young company that's been hammering away for a few years that I know, and I met with the founder last week. I said, how are things? She goes, well, we finally finished our raise and we just leased an 8,000 square foot facility, and I need to double my workforce now. I need another 20 engineers because we're going to start manufacturing. Those are the stories. Those are the ones that are going to drive this economy. But for every one of those, there's unfortunately 9 others that have crashed and burned in the infamous valley of death that we hear so much about. So I think if we focus on skills at a very grassroots level and push that down as far as we can and bring back that magical twinkle in the eye that some of us had who grew up with the space program, who saw it as something really cool and adventurous and exciting, um, then I think you'll start having kids in elementary school, in middle school, high school, who see this as an opportunity, not as science fiction. Because for the first time in a long time, science reality and science fiction are back to being the same thing. And that's where we are now. The notion of, yeah, we're going to have stuff on the moon in 10 years. Yeah, we're going to have more space stations flying in 10 years. There's a plan to go to Mars. Elon is not the federal government. He's not going to get excited and bored based on a 4-year term. He's in it for the long haul. And that's what's going to drag the rest of the industry along. Now, people can criticize the billionaires, but in history, it's the billionaires who have pretty well started every successful industry on the planet. Or people who started them rapidly became billionaires and went on to build those industries. So you need people to lead. And in this case, if it were just NASA, we wouldn't be having any of these conversations. There'd be no foundation for the future if there was just NASA doing the same old thing and arguing over, yeah, maybe in another 10 years or 20 years we'll go to Mars. And then the next president says, oh yeah, let's go to Mars, and does nothing. This is gonna happen now. And I think it's an irreversible force. So we should be excited about it, but we better do our work to make sure that the reason it doesn't fail is because we had a shortage of talent. And yes, space does have, let's say, the more negative side, if you will, the military side to it. We have adversaries, surprise, surprise, welcome to Earth. And they have plans, and they were not going to play by the rules that we will naively wish everybody played by. They won't. And yes, we're going to take a lot of our problems off the planet with us. Can't escape that. People aren't going to agree. We never have, and I don't know that we ever will. It's going to take something far bigger than all of us to make that happen. And so we have to be prepared, because space is going to be competitive. It's not, oh, there's plenty of room up there for everybody. There's the moon, which is a lot smaller than the Earth, and the resources are in very specific places. And then there's Mars, which is a lot smaller than the Earth, and everybody wants to go to the South Pole there. Everybody wants to go to the South Pole on the moon. There will be territorial issues. We're going to go back in time in terms of some geopolitical issues. And unfortunately, they'll probably take a disaster and one country needing another one to save them that might break the impasse. But what a horrible way to have to do it. But it's all jobs. There are going to be a lot of civilians. Okay. And kids need to understand this. Space isn't about, Space Force guardians and, aliens or something. Okay. This is people going to do jobs. Someone's going to be doing supervising the asteroid mining robots. Someone's going to be supervising the house-sized 3D printers on the moon and Mars that are building structures and all kinds of equipment. And in Earth orbit, there will be a lot of people before any of this happens. You're going to see orbital manufacturing very soon, because again, it's a priority of Space Force as well as industry, where Space Force has said, hey, we want to see total in situ manufacturing. We want to see people in orbit find the resources, break them down, make stuff, build it, and keep it in orbit. So there's a young company called Cislunar Industries that has a foundry, and they've tested it now, and it's done extremely well, where they can take strips of aluminum, and 85% of satellites are aluminum. So all the junk up there does have a recycling purpose and value to it. And they feed the strips of aluminum into their foundry, and it produces wire, ingots, or sheets of aluminum, which can then be brought to an orbital manufacturing platform and used to make stuff. There's even a rocket company out in Australia, Neumann Space, whose thrusters burn solid aluminum. So the two companies have a deal. Well, making gets out of recycled aluminum, feed them to you to power your orbital transfer vehicles to shuttle around and move stuff around in orbit. And so this is going to continue to happen. Earth orbit's going to get very crowded, which is why you're seeing all the focus on debris mitigation right now, being the primary objective. Clean up the neighborhood before you start putting up new houses. And so that's why Space Force launched Orbital Prime as its first Space Prime initiative over a year ago, was to bring in technologies to identify, retrieve, and dispose of debris. And what's that going to create? More jobs on the Earth, a lot more ground stations, a lot more transmission and receiving facilities aside from just traditional ground stations. The manufacturing sector, it starts here and it moves to Earth orbit, and then it'll move to the moon, and then it'll move out to Mars. That's how this is going to migrate. And so it's concentric circles. But we have to start it here. And it's going to be a lot of manufacturing, high paid manufacturing jobs where people can be trained, where they will probably be making more money than they're making now working for another type of manufacturing industry. Resources is going to be a major driver, and it's going to be the biggest competitive market with jobs off the planet. Saudi Arabia has said they want to be the world leader in off-planet resources, just like they're a pretty big one here. They're looking at buying space station. They're looking at buying spacecraft. You don't have to be, you don't have to have a NASA anymore to be a spacefaring country. You need a checkbook. That's all you need. Okay, there's 130 some odd space agencies on the planet, and many more coming. And all people have to do is say, I want to be in space. I have a checkbook. I'd like to buy one of these new stations for $2 or $3 billion. Piece of change, no problem. I want somebody to train my people as astronauts so that they can work in space. I'm going to hire a company to operate that station. I'm going to hire an operator from that company to be resident on the station while I do whatever I'm going to do for my own national interest or economic interest. And whether I'm a country, whether I'm Pfizer, whether I'm any research and development company, I'm a big ag tech company, and I'm working on, off-planet agriculture, which is happening a lot right now, especially in the Middle East with a bunch of initiatives. You can buy your way into the Space Club now. And so this is why you see the, African Space Agency, who built a beautiful facility, and they headquartered themselves in Cairo. And, we heard about Kenya earlier. Pretty much every country in Africa has a space agency. Everybody wants a piece of this economy. This is the level playing field. This is the fresh start. This is where every country can lift itself to some level of technology or capability that can contribute to that economy. They weren't all born with oil under their feet. Now we have every country, as long as they've got people who can get an education, who have a skill, everybody can participate in this economy. That's why it'll be larger than the tech economy by a long shot. I'll shut up and take any questions you might have.
Thanks so much, Dan. Yeah, if any of the people viewing right now have any questions, please do feel free to chime in. Rebecca, right on. Go for it.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, Dan. It's so great
Rebecca.
to see you again. I always think of you when I'm thinking about market trends and investing. I'm like, what is Dan thinking right now? I need to check out his latest advice. So thanks for being here today. Dan, what you said really resonated with me as a social scientist and as someone who has studied social justice issues, because you're explaining this need for us to go around the world and scoop up talent and scoop up people who want to be engineers. And, in a minute, we'll bring in our next speaker who, focuses on K through 12 development. And what you're talking about is we need to find, you called it grassroots skill development, and getting students to really see it as an opportunity, not just some Star Wars or Star Trek idea. And so what do you think about what would it take for us to start collecting talent from around the world? And as you said, Africa has, a space agency. Like almost every African country has a space agency. So how can we really nurture this need for our workforce, our space workforce, and at the same time help kids who could never get an education? How can we bring them into this?
It's a challenge. We have enough trouble getting STEM education, the traction it needs in the United States. And yet, for the planet, I think to set up, and it would take a nonprofit that has no political agenda, that can create a program that does simple, basic education of the opportunity. It was easy. When I was a little kid, the Apollo program happened, and I wanted to be an astronaut and I wanted to be an engineer. I mean, it was pretty simple. I like that. That's cool. I want to be one. We have so many things that are passed off as heroes right now, which aren't, and so many things that are passed off as being, oh, this is what you should do, which are useless, that we need to raise this to the proper level, because what it means is development of those countries. It means lifting people out of poverty in those countries by creating jobs, by having institutions that are going to educate people on something more than the basics of survival. And so pushing this agenda around the world is important. With the Planetary Society, we focus on STEM all the time, and we always talk about how do we push this internationally. We have a lot of international members and donors. But it still comes down to, is there a champion in that country we can connect to who's willing to make this happen? And if it's a political figure, how long are they going to be there? They may take the champion mindset with them when they leave in a few years. So it's finding people at the institution level, at the educational institution level, that says, we're going to create this. We're going to do this in association with a university in the US or a school in the US, and do the sister city thing, but for universities and colleges that want to focus on developing students, and let them develop them there if we can help them, so that they stay there. Too many countries where these engineering students leave that are poor countries, they come here and they don't want to leave, which is great. It's great for us, but it stinks for their country. So I think we need to help them develop talent there, or a program where they go back and help. But it's going to take champions, not politicians, not administration members or education ministers. None of that'll work, because there isn't the longevity. They have a personal agenda for what their legacy is going to be, and they won't be around to see it through. That's kind of how space gets done in the United States. Becomes a political thing, and it's as good as whoever's championing it at the time.
Yeah, Javin, I think you've got a question.
Yeah. No, just a comment on this. There's a model that I'm very fond of that I think could be scaled to this, and it's a free university that's funded. It's called the World Quant University Fellowships, and so World Quant is part of like a $17 billion fund where they use use AI to engineer financial predictions and outcomes, and the stock market kind of stuff. And they're getting into healthcare, and I'm really an admirer of their founder, Igor Tolchinsky. And one of the things he did was he created World Quant University. And World Quant University enables qualified quant learners to grow entirely free of cost by way of our purpose-built learning platform. World Quant U makes advanced quality education accessible to capable students everywhere by leveraging technology at scale. So basically what they did was, and this is about finding quants, right? This is another thing. And if anyone doesn't know who a quant is, it's somebody who's using AI and math and a lot of predictive analytics and, to do financial forecasting and, other kinds of forecasting, but it's mostly financial. But anyway, it's totally free. You could be in Zimbabwe if you've got internet connection and you decide you want to be a quant. You can go to World Quant University. They're certified in Louisiana. So I just thought it was a great model.
Yeah.
And I'm a fan of Igor. He got his start in gaming, and I'm not sure what games he did, but anyway, I love
a lot of them do.
We all need AI.
Yeah, no, a lot of, and I've managed a number of quants before there was AI. It was just good old fashioned quantitative analysis, but
Right.
But yeah, something like that needs to be in place. Somebody needs to stand something up. Maybe it's, a group of schools that are focused on this. I'm thinking of Arizona State, which I know very well because of their big new space initiative with my friend Jim Bell and several others over there that are making that happen and stitching together some schools. But anyway, my time's up, so I'm gonna stop.
Well,
Thank you
and one
so
thing I
much.
could add to that too is sort of like the charitable causes or just like
Yeah.
Meta and the big media companies want to get eyeballs, right? And so they want to get your dopamine going. But what's better? It would be better off to have like ongoing engagement, through a platform that was available, like a new version of Facebook or whatever social media. And then you can sell ad space on that. You get your eyeballs, and then the product is freeware that's educating. And then I echo your comment about the lack of engineers. It's super important. And when I was looking through, chasing down the sustainability goals of these aerospace companies, it's always in the background. It's like, we need more engineers. There are not enough people. They'll go to the kindergarten level if they have to. It's a real big problem. So,
Yep.
I mean, this is something that needs to happen. I think it's great you brought it up, Dan.
We'll just get Elon to build it and strap it to X, and then we'll have the worldwide distribution we need. It needs a billionaire to sponsor it.
Yeah, absolutely does.
As a nonprofit. Anyway,
Yep.
back to
Yeah.
you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Javin, for that discussion. Really interesting to hear your perspectives on the hiring environment right now in aerospace. Appreciate you joining the stream today. And with that, I can see that our next speaker is online. We're going to be hearing from Dr. Mark Wagner today. So Mark is the founder of Aries Learning, Director of Education Partnerships at the Aldrin Family Foundation, and President of the Space Prize Foundation. He is a former astronautical engineering student, high school English teacher, and career education technologist. His focus now is on space education, preparing students for the growing space economy. Perfect segue from our previous discussion. And humanity's rapidly approaching multi-planet future. He wrote a book on the topic, created an accompanying curriculum for students, and runs an online course for teachers. Welcome to the stream, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rachel. And Rebecca, great to be here. I couldn't ask for a better segue, I guess. That's fantastic. So I do have some slides queued up if you guys would like me to dive into slides, and also can just chat and happy to take questions along the way. But otherwise, I'll leave 10 minutes or so at the end too.
Perfect. Yeah, slides would be great. I've got a presentation prepared for us.
Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. Let me share screen. And hopefully you guys can see a nice full screen slide. How's that look to you?
Beautiful.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you, Rachel. That was a fantastic introduction. I don't think I need to spend any more time on that. I can dive right in. But by way of introducing Aries very briefly, Aries is very much focused on preparing students for the growing space economy and also for humanity's rapidly approaching multi-planet future. And I think this question here is a great place to start. I'm going to talk a lot about the future in the next 10 years and what our kids are going to graduate into, but are kids even ready for today's reality? And this is not just, aerospace engineering students, but we talk to space companies today and they need welders and they need people who can work with composites and they need a little bit of everything. But if we look at just a handful of space technologies that I think are often not appreciated for the impact they're about to have or are having. This is representative of them. If you've got a large capacity reusable spacecraft that can be anywhere on the planet in 45 minutes, that changes a lot of things. So we all think of Starship as going to the moon and going to Mars, but what if you could be anywhere on the planet in 45 minutes at a price they think is going to be competitive with first class air travel? How many industries is that going to change? We haven't had a change like that since, jumbo jets in the 60s. And what's Amazon going to do with that? And what's the military going to do with that? And you also look at space observation technologies, things like Planet Labs and so forth, being able to look down at the Earth in 4K real-time video anywhere on the Earth, 24/7. That sort of technology is right around the corner, if not already happening in multiple spectrums and radar and you name it. And how many industries is that going to change? I often joke about if it's not just the space economy, is not just the aerospace industry, it's also how space affects every other industry. So if you're the flippant example I use is if you work for a company that makes sneakers, how do these technologies change shoes, or how could they, right? From materials to GPS, for instance. And then the third one is ubiquitous broadband internet. We talk a lot about Starlink today, and we've seen how that can bring internet to people who don't have access, even across borders, despite despots and dictators. But how much does that change the Internet of Things in farmland in Africa, for instance, where they're able to not only observe it, but to talk with sensors and machines and tractors on the ground, that sort of thing. So these are, especially I think with the idea of the 45 minutes to anywhere in the world, these are technologies that people don't necessarily dig into and the impact that they're going to have, but these are going to impact not just people in the aerospace industry, but people in all industries. So it's a great place to start in terms of talking about how are we preparing kids to take advantage of this, whatever industry that they're in. The other way I approach this topic these days is looking at the biggest problems facing schools, especially post-COVID. Some statistics I like to share. Last year, 70% of New York City, I'm sorry, I said that backwards, 40% of New York City public high school students or public school students across the age levels were chronically absent. So they're missing more than 10% of their days in school. And 70% of LAUSD teachers reported burnout and a desire to leave the profession. So these are not unusual numbers across the country and around the world, frankly. Student engagement, teacher burnout are two of the biggest challenges, or student disengagement, I should say, are two of the biggest challenges in schools today. But both of those can be significantly improved by tapping into kids' excitement about space. And last year, Unistellar released a study. They had a third-party research firm, Wakefield Research, I think it was, did this study of 500 U.S. families across demographics, and they found that 93% of U.S. kids are excited about space. So this is not a gender thing. This is not boys or girls. This is not an age thing. It's not a socioeconomic thing. 93% is a huge number. Even if it's a little inflated in that particular study, this is a huge number that's across demographics. So the lesson here is if schools want to address student disengagement and teacher burnout, all they need to do is help teachers have the confidence to talk to their kids about space and tap into that excitement. And I think teachers get excited about this too, which is fantastic. So a big part of this is exactly like you guys were just talking about, workforce development. And the big number that gets thrown around that everybody in this field is familiar with is the idea that, hey, the space industry is already a $400 billion a year industry, projected to be $1 trillion in 10 years or so. What I think is interesting about that number is it doesn't even include entirely new industries like, say, asteroid mining, which has the potential to be $1 trillion industry by that point, or space solar power, which has the potential to be $1 trillion industry by that point. And again, it also doesn't include the growing space economy and the way that space technologies will influence other industries as well, and how your sneakers will behave, for instance. The other thing is, if you look at today's second graders or third graders and you project out 10 years, they're going to graduate into a world where we've got a permanent presence on the moon, if all goes well, and we've landed people on Mars, if Elon has his way, and we have multiple commercial space stations. So this is not 40 years down the road anymore. You know, I remember in the 90s having a NASA poster in my room that turned out to be a little ambitious, but they said we'd be on Mars in 2014. But this is not decades in the future. We're talking in the next 10 years. If these plans pan out, the kids are going to be living in a multi-planet future. And already humanity's had people in space continuously for 20 years. So this is also not so much a future as a reality that we're preparing kids for. And we need not just engineers and scientists and astronauts or test pilots, if you will, but we need folks across the space economy who are, you know, I've talked to in space interior designers, space fashion designers. You know, people have got to make these new spacesuits that look great on tourists, right? And are more functional. I've talked to space historians. Certainly, there's space lawyers and space financiers. And so whatever students' passions are, they can be a part of this growing space economy, and they can be a part of this multi-planet future for humanity. So how do we prepare kids for that? When traditional schools are based on a industrial era model, or even I would say a medieval model of kids sitting in rows and copying down what the teacher says, we're not doing a very good job of preparing them for a fast-moving, unpredictable future, which is what we can expect with the explosion of development in space. Never mind other fields like AI and places where we're seeing a lot of unpredictable, rapid change, right? So, but we can optimize schools to prepare kids for fast-moving, unpredictable futures, right? And we can prepare them with mindsets like the skill sets and mindsets, I like to say, like the explorer's mindset, moonshot thinking, design thinking, helping them with multidisciplinary synthesis, including ethical dimensions of the challenges that they're addressing, and preparing them to reflect on their learning. We like to talk about the Japanese concept of Hansei, or relentless self-reflection. To break that down a little bit, one example that I love to talk about was when we had the opportunity, my co-founders in particular, to run a moonshot laboratory in Honolulu a couple of years ago before the pandemic. And the idea was giving the kids literally their 20% time. From 5 local schools, kids came to the Moonshot Lab 1 day a week, and they were asked, what problem do you want to solve? You've got all the resources of the lab and the faculty at your disposal. And kids tended to, these were largely Indigenous kids. The funding was Kamehameha Schools Foundation related funding. And they tended to pick problems that were very, very specific to their context. So they put sensors in the ocean to study water quality and things like that. And of course, there was kids interested in launching their own t-shirt line or clothing line or whatever it might be. But they among those sort of context specific goals that they had, one of the things they wanted to do was to teach traditional Polynesian navigation methods. And so these kids, as you can see here, just sort of these screenshots of some of the videos we have on the site, they built a planetarium. You can see this is the model. They later made a full-size one that people could go inside, and there were projectors to project the Polynesian constellations. So it turns out there's not really a lot of ways to learn about Polynesian star navigation today. So this is a way they could go in, they could learn the old navigations and the old methods. They also, if you look at your night sky apps on your phone, those are not going to have Polynesian constellations. We have sort of a different tradition of constellations with Orion and so forth that you can easily find apps to learn about. So the kids also connected with programmers in Europe actually, and built a SkyMap app that included their traditional constellations and navigation methods. So really, really cool stuff. They were building robots, and they were building drones to drop emergency equipment in the ocean where jet skis can't get. And the cool thing is, if you provide kids with that opportunity and ask them what problems they want to solve, that becomes the gateway to all kinds of learning, and they can begin to, with support, learn and implement the kinds of skill sets and mindsets I'm talking about. So for instance, the explorer's mindset, it sounds like it's a good fit for space exploration, but really what we're talking about is not just a love of discovery, but a comfort with the unknown. And with that also becomes a belief that the answer is out there. There's something of the abundance mindset also in the explorer, right? That if you keep looking, you're going to find a solution to your problem in the environment. And so preparing kids with that is a great place to start so that they become comfortable with change and challenges and obstacles, and sort of their self-efficacy and their belief that they can overcome those things. The place we go next is moonshot thinking, and this was sort of made famous by the X Lab in Google's Alphabet. But the way they look at it is they look at a huge problem, like say highest cause of death in America is auto accidents. They look at a radical solution. Why don't we remove the biggest problem, which is human error? And the breakthrough technology is developed for self-driving cars, for instance. This is where Waymo comes from. And there's a number of other examples I could jump into, but we start with this before design thinking so that kids learn to think big and think outside the box. And even with kids, and especially so with teachers, when we're doing moonshot thinking exercises, we typically have to come back to them after their initial ideation, brainstorming exercises and say like, okay, think bigger, think impossible. And sooner or later, you're going to have an idea where you're like, oh, that's maybe not so impossible, and be able to backtrack and start to develop something as a solution. Once you've got that sort of piece in place, and you can look at design methodology or design thinking, and there's a lot of different models for this, but all of them look at sort of understanding the problem, understanding the user, empathize in this model, or an ethnography in terms of interviewing your users, and then defining your problem before you begin to ideate, brainstorm on potential solutions. So there are, of course, ideation techniques. I was just talking about the wishing technique. You have to only think of impossible solutions. There's dozens more. And so giving the kids these sorts of tool sets that they can then apply to any problem in any field is a great foundation. Better than sitting in rows copying down what your teacher put on the board, right? I got the opportunity to write a number of academic papers on this while I was a scholar at the Kepler Space Institute in Florida, and collected those into a book. So definitely want to share that if you guys are interested. It hits on a lot of these similar themes. And then it also looks a little bit further at how might we educate students once we get there. So on the moon or on Mars, or in orbit in a orbital habitat, for instance. And it's easy to take a couple more steps and to think about fun activities for kids. There's a couple chapters about designing the first school on the moon at the Moon Village at the South Pole. And you can easily turn that into a design challenge for your students. In fact, I got the opportunity last year to work with the Space Prize Foundation, which is particularly focused on empowering young women to pursue STEAM education and to explore careers in aerospace. And we developed a curriculum that gets into not just an introduction to space science and the history of space exploration, but also gets into why space is important to people on Earth, how kids can develop the sorts of skill sets and mindsets I was talking about, and what's going on with the new space economy. It even digs a little bit deeper into issues of space philosophy, which I know Foundation for Future also does, in terms of governance and ethics and sustainability, that kind of thing. So it's pretty ambitious, but it's small amounts of text, and then links to interactives from around the web, literally thousands, from National Geographic to NASA and you name it. So it's an open education resource. I'll make sure to drop the links in here too, so that people can get there. But if you go to spaceeducation.org, you can start using that today. I also developed an online course for teachers to kind of walk them through the book and the free curriculum. If any of you are interested in that, it's arieslearning.com/course. Real easy. I've got a new cohort coming up in September. It's 12 modules that walks you through the skill sets and mindsets and the other elements from the book and the curriculum. I should also mention that geologist Dr. Kirby Runyon and I are running an astrogeology experience for educators in New Mexico, where they go see landforms that are analogous to things you might find on the moon or Mars or Titan or elsewhere in the solar system. And where this came from is Kirby does this for future astronauts in Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin, who will see largely similar landforms when they go their suborbital flights. And we started looking at it, and I was like, hey, Kirby, why don't we offer this training to teachers and build their confidence in talking to their kids without having to buy a $500,000 ticket to space? We can still go study the geology. And we're finding it's kind of interesting to enthusiasts too. So if you go to arieslearning.com/astrogeology, you could join us. I'm doing a lot of work now with the Aldrin Family Foundation. So I wanted to also mention what they've got going on. They make these truly giant maps. We're talking 30 feet to a side that you can take into school situations and do all kinds of learning across the curriculum with the kids. They're doing robotics. They're designing a home on the moon, which, by the way, as soon as you start talking life support, you can teach anything. You can teach the oxygen cycle and the carbon cycle and the water cycle. Designing a settlement on Mars is particularly multidisciplinary. So lots of great stuff you can do with the giant maps. They've got summer camps as well, and a satellite program for students to design and launch their own satellites. So a lot of really cool stuff available through them. And I'm particularly excited. We have a new partnership with Kerbal Space Program, the video game. More of a simulation than a game, though. You kids can design their own launch vehicles and test them and crash them, but they can learn the basics of orbital mechanics and rendezvous in space and getting to the moon or getting to Mars or setting up a transfer orbit. It can get really sophisticated the further they go into the game. So we're excited about that being a way that students can learn about getting to the moon or Mars, and then you can roll out the map and they can do robotic rovers and set up settlements and all that. So it's just aldrinfoundation.org if you guys are interested in exploring that more, or reach out to me anytime. My role there is to scale this to as many schools as we can. That said, I've got a couple of free things to offer as well that might be interesting to anybody that's interested in education, whether or not you're a formal educator. But the next Space Education Summit, which is a free online conference, is coming up November 10th. That's a great opportunity to connect, hear from a panel of astronauts in the morning. We asked them how they think we can prepare kids for this coming multi-planet future and for the space economy. And then guest speakers throughout the day. So we've got psychology sessions and education sessions and young professional sessions and a lot of great learning opportunities. There's also an associated Facebook community. If you go to spaceeducator.net, you can get to the Facebook community. We started it after the last Space Education Summit. So there's a few folks there that share prolifically. I try to share resources there when I've got something relevant, and definitely invite you guys to join. I can also share a spreadsheet, a little bit harder to share the link, but I've got a spreadsheet of about 100 space education resources that some interns put together a little over a year ago. So there's always new stuff to add, and there may be people watching today live or on the recording that have stuff to add. But if you guys want to reach out to me, I can share that as well, which you can use with the kids in your schools or your communities. So I will end with this question as we kick into the Q&A, but never mind today's Starship and being around the world in 45 minutes. Are kids ready for a future where we may very soon have settlements on Mars? And what are we doing to prepare them for that? So kick it over to the group or anybody in the chat. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, thank you so much, Mark. I think that's an incredible batch of resources that you've got for students and educators. I'll pause here for one moment to see if we've got any questions off the bat from the people viewing. But if not, Mark, I'm curious to hear a little bit about the challenges that you see in keeping students engaged from these young ages, all the way to the end of their university when they might be actually entering the growing space economy. What do you see as being the biggest obstacles in keeping kids engaged all the way through the beginning of their workforce experience?
Oh, that's a great question. So I can take your question in two ways, but one is, I think, a problem with our system, because it is sort of that industrial age, like, hey, you're going to go to math class and get your math bolted on. You're going to go to science class and get your science bolted on, and so on. And we've built, understandably, with a sort of need for accountability, or at least a perceived need for accountability in schools, we built this massive system of standards and curricula and that sort of thing. And there's this pressure to get through the curriculum or to meet all of the standards. And any expert in the education research field is going to tell you, like, no, cut that down to a third and go deep, rather than trying to memorize a bunch of facts and regurgitate them on the test. That just plain doesn't work. So being able to even talk about space in schools is hard, because other than a little bit of earth and space science in in middle school, for instance, for most people, it's not even in the curriculum. But speaking as a former high school English teacher, if I knew my kids are excited about space, and I had even a small degree of confidence to talk to them about it, I could be looking at nonfiction writing standards, speaking and listening and oral presentation standards. And, I used to teach a senior project. And I remember a kid who wanted to be an astronaut. He did a great senior project on it, with a simulation too. But those are all opportunities to tap into kids' excitement. It doesn't need to be sort of the traditional curriculum in order to help them develop those skills, even if you are, beholden to state standards or national core curriculum, that sort of thing. The other way that I'm hearing your question is, how do we keep them engaged? Lots of kids are excited about space when they're little, but maybe less so when they're teenagers or when they get to college and have to think about making money. And that's a different problem, but I think it's very similar to the awareness problem that was in the previous discussion around helping kids understand that even if they're not a space scientist or engineer, that they can be a part of this, and that they need to be a part of this, that there's a place for designers and lawyers and so forth. And there's a place in other companies, other fields, for people who understand space and how to take advantage of the advantages it offers now.
Definitely. I also want to expand about this kind of maintaining excitement. I know that we've talked a little bit about, or a lot about, the need for engineers in the space industry as we kind of see it and know it today. And I think, you touched on it a little bit, that this future space economy is going to need more than just engineers. It's going to need experience from all across the civilian community. Do you think that there's an issue in that sort of education right now in our schools? Like, are kids aware that there's more to do than just, be an engineer or be an astronaut in the space industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of that kind of awareness. And I think it's across the board. Certainly we also need more scientists and engineers. That would be awesome. And we're leaving a lot of talent on the table when we see that women and other minority groups are not as well represented. We want everyone to feel like this could be for them. We don't want everyone to be scientists and engineers, but we want people who would make great scientists and engineers to think that could be for them. But the flip side is, we don't need everyone to be scientists and engineers. And, when I talk to people from SpaceX, they say they need welders. When I talk to people from Virgin, they say they need people who work with composites, and SpaceX in particular, sort of the flip side of that story is I play hockey with a couple of guys who are welders, and they wound up becoming machinists, and now one of their biggest clients is SpaceX. And it's great playing hockey with those guys on Saturday morning, and then they come out and they're like, "Mark, those SpaceX guys are the dumbest smart people we know." The stuff we have to explain to them. So they don't have their college degrees, they're not engineers, but they're absolutely critical to explaining things to people at SpaceX and getting the job done. So there's a lot of levels of raising awareness around what's just happening in the growing space economy and what role kids can have in it in their career.
If I can, that's really interesting, because if you look at the reports in the last year, whether it's Harvard, whether it's McKinsey, whether it's Deloitte, all these big reports, one thing that everybody keeps coming out and saying is every company must have a space strategy.
Yes.
Every company. And because of that, that's where the pool's going to come from. You're going to see people working that are welders at company X, and all of a sudden they're going to find out that their company, for whatever reason, started a space division, and they're going to have an opportunity to move over. And that migration in industry is going to start, because at the top there will be strategic decisions made for space. And I think that's a critical factor, and that'll push down to the education system, and more importantly, outside the education system, to vocational education. That's where stuff happens. That's where those blue-collar jobs are. It's the vocational education system. That's one of those networks we should be pursuing at the same time. I love your stuff. Yeah. I love that.
You hit on I'm not sure it's quite an analogy, but a parallel that I think speaks well to teachers. Because as an education technologist, we saw a ton of change in our field over the last 20 years. Sort of finally, they've been talking about computers changing education forever, but what happened is obviously the internet changed every industry. Every company now needs to be using the internet in some way, right? And mobile devices came along and changed every industry. And 10 years ago, Google started thinking mobile first, right? And that's, you bring a couple billion more people online, that's how they got online. And so we're right at the same inflection point where space over the next 10-15 years is going to change every industry. And it's gonna be a challenge for schools and systems to keep up, for sure.
No, there's the O3B market, the other 3 billion.
Yes.
On the planet who have no connectivity. We're working with a major satellite communications company right now to provide them the ground antennas that they're going to use to connect hundreds of millions of people in India, Africa, South America, Indonesia. That's part of that foundation that's got to be poured before you can open their eyes to what's out there, because then they'll have access to the internet. Then
100%. Yeah.
beyond the village that they can dream about. So,
and once they do, it really does open up a lot of doors. I know you were talking about Africa. You may know better than me, but I've connected with a handful of teachers in Africa that are doing really great space education. It's all because they've got access to the internet.
Absolutely. We're on the precipice of a really exciting world. And I think it's been great to hear from you all today about how we can engage students and engage new people in this growing and exciting industry. And with that, it is noon. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Mark, for that presentation. That is a wrap for Conversations for the Future for August. We will see you again in October. So there won't be a September event. Keep an eye out for registration, speakers, and more soon. The format will be changing slightly, so stay tuned for that. But with that, thank you all very much and have a great rest of your day.
take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Rebecca. Bye all.